Hello everyone. In this video, I want to continue our discussion about inheritance. More specifically, I want to talk about method overriding. So, in the last video, I showed you how to call methods from the parent class using a child instance variable. Another thing the child class can do is to override methods from its parent class and make its own version of the same method. Now, let me show you an example. So let's first define a new method in the person.java file, which is our parent class. I'll say public, and then the return type is string. And then the name of the method is getDetail. And it doesn't take any parameters. Inside of the function body, we do return. And I want to return the first name with the last name. So first name plus some space and then plus last name. Now let's see how to override this getDetail method in our employee class. So now let's switch to the employee class. As you can see, employee class have an extra field of ID. So the idea of method overriding is that we want to be able to use the getDetail method, but we also wanted to include our employee ID on top of first name and last name. So we need to modify the original version of the getDetail method from person class so that we make it to return ID plus first name plus last name in our employee class. Now let's see how to do that using method overriding. Now, in order to override a method, we need to use a annotation. So we use a @sign, so @override, and then we use public as the access modifier, and then followed by the return type, which is string, and then the method name is getDetail. We take no parameters, and inside of the body we do return, and then we return the ID plus. Now we need to call get first name and get last name from the parent class, so we do super dot get first name and then plus super dot get last name. Now let's add some spaces between these fields. So after ID, we do a empty space, and then after get first name, we add another space, and that finishes the overridden version of this method. Now there is one more thing we need to do to make this work, which is we need to generate a getter and setter for ID field. Let's go click on code and generate getter and setter, select ID, and OK. So here's our getter and setter. Now let's switch back to the main.java. As you can see, we already have a employee object, which is A, and we give it first name and last name. Now let's comment out the system out. We need to give the A an ID. So we do a.setID, and the value is an integer, so we say the ID is 234. Now in comparison, let's create a person object. So we do person p equals new person and last name, first name and last name, so Jane and Smith. Now let's call the getDetail method on both of these objects. So let's first call it on the person object. So p.getDetail, and let's print that out on the console. So we do system.out.println, and then put the p.getDetail inside of it. Now let's copy that and paste it in, and change the person object to employee object. Now let's run this program. So as you can see, for the person object, we got first name and last name. And for the employee object, we got ID, first name and last name. So as you can see, which version of the method to call depending on the type of the object that is calling it. Now, there are some rules about method overriding that I want to mention specifically. So let's switch to the employee.class and let's talk about it. So let's go to the bottom of this class and let's do a comment block and write all the rules in this comment block. So this is rules for method overriding. Now, rule number 1 is that private method cannot be overridden. So let's write that out. Private method cannot be overridden. Next is rule number 2. So rule number 2 is static method cannot be overridden. Next, rule number 3 is the final method cannot be overridden. So we will talk about final keyword in the next tutorial, but for now, just remember that if a method is marked as final, it cannot be overridden. Now, rule number 4, so the overriding method must have the same return type as well as the parameter list that it takes as the original method. So they must be the same method signature in order to override. Next, we have rule number 5. So the access modifier of the overriding method can have more access than the original method, but not less. So in other words, if the original method is protected, we can use protected or public on our overriding method, but we cannot mark the overriding method as private. So that's about it for this video. In the next tutorial, we're going to talk about the keyword final. Thanks for watching and see you guys next time.